Well, listening to both of those is the Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare, John Penrose. John, I'm genuinely not being sarcastic, and you and I know each other. We've dined together at various charity events and what have you. I think many people will be amazed to learn that the Prime Minister has an anti-corruption champion.
Just to be clear, the point of being the anti-corruption champion, it's a role that's existed since Tony Blair was Prime Minister. It's unsalaried, it's unpaid, but it's aimed at trying to chase up all sorts of different things in the anti-corruption strategy. Yes, there's one of those too. It's a 5-year thing with about 130 different action points and deadlines right the way across government. So that's what my role is. It's about trying to improve the system, not about dealing with individual cases and there's no squad of detectives who report to me to deal with individual cases. That is rightly, and I think sensibly, handled by the police and by independent investigators. The last thing anybody should want, I think, is to have politically motivated prosecutions being run by anybody, including me.
Totally agree with that. And it's intriguing from Alastair Graham, Joe Twynham, the pollster, Justin Tomlinson, your colleague who was on just a moment ago, and the great Martin Bell, all making the point that it is more about the system than it is about the individuals. For every wrong 'un, there's 100 good 'uns, or maybe that number's a bit generous, but you know what I think about this. It seems to me as an outsider that there are things that are so obvious and easy to do that you simply ban lobbying. You don't just have a register of it. You say, no, you may not take money from somebody to come into this place to try and push a particular cause. Registration is one thing, but just don't do it. And if you've got a job already as a doctor, like one or two of your colleagues, that's fine. But anything else, unless a lawyer, is simply not on. I mean, that could happen tomorrow.
Well, oddly, I think the rules already get pretty close to what you're describing anyway. The rules say that you can't accept money to lobby and then go and initiate a conversation with a minister about that particular topic. So quite a lot of this stuff is already banned and has been banned for some time. The question is what you do when, not if, you find a problem. Just simply because, like any other walk of life, as you rightly said, most MPs, like most doctors, like most business people, are doing it for the right reasons. But MPs are human, and there will always be a few bad apples. We hope not many. So you've got to have a process that deals with them when you find them.
Is the Prime Minister naive in these matters? Sitting next to us when we were at the dinner for Riding for the Disabled was your lovely wife, Dido Harding, who made the speech at that event. She was castigated over track and trace, not whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but because she knew she was married to you and you knew the Prime Minister and what have you. And Jake Berry, another mutual friend, he got it in the neck because his wife was absolutely the preeminently brilliant appointment to run the private sector in finding a vaccine. I mean, surely Boris saw both of those things coming.
Well, bear in mind that there's a huge difference, and then there should always be a huge difference. And putting aside the case of my wife, yes or no, there's a huge difference between connection and corruption. Just because somebody knows somebody doesn't mean to say that you can never talk to them again if there's anything to do with government. Otherwise, most of the country couldn't talk to ministers, and the entire system would scream to a halt. The point is whether or not there's a conflict of interest, whether or not there's a problem which is then created. And one of the things which I think we just need to be really clear about is to say, look, the difficulty here is that you have MPs voting their own cases. You have MPs basically sitting in judgment over each other. That's silly. You don't get that in any other walk of life. If anybody else does something wrong, I used to be a businessman before I got into politics. Any other company, for example, or a profession, and if you do something wrong, there'll be an internal disciplinary process. If you don't like that conclusion, you can probably take it to an employment tribunal, but you don't then get to take it back to your colleagues and ask them to vote on whether or not you should be sacked. That's clearly silly, and that's what happens in politics. How can that be right?
So, indeed, I agree with that 100%. So does Alastair Graham, more to the point. And he said that on the panel looking into these matters, there are lay members, and that's jolly good, but they don't have a vote. They should have a vote, and the chair should always be one of those lay members. And Martin Bell said all cases ultimately should be voted for on the floor of the House, not by some committee or number 10. Do you tick both of those boxes?
Not quite, although I'm sort of headed in the same direction. I think that the issue is that you've got to have an independent panel. Yes, absolutely. We can argue about whether it's a lay person or an MP who chairs it or not. I actually happen to think that Chris Bryant, who's an MP, who is the current chair, does a pretty good job. So you might want to change that, maybe. But the crucial thing is, firstly, that an MP who disagrees with that verdict needs to have somewhere to appeal it. There needs to be an independent appeal with no MPs on it at all, who can go back through and say, is this right? Has the right number of, have all the witnesses been called? Has justice been done properly? And then when you've got that appeal decision, the equivalent of the employment tribunal in any other walk of life, which doesn't exist at the moment, not for MPs, that we're one of the few groups that can't take something to an appeal to an employment tribunal. But when you've got that particular verdict in, it shouldn't come back to Parliament to vote on at all. Nobody else gets to vote on an appeal court decision. Why on earth should we? And so it's a question of giving us the same rights as everybody else, but not giving us more rights than everybody else.
Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us and for those very thoughtful observations. And there is a pattern emerging here that there are good uns there and there are bad uns there, but actually putting it right is not beyond the imagination of folk, and you're one of them with a good imagination, but also you have the ear of the Prime Minister. So good hunting, John Penrose, and best to everyone at home. Thank you very much indeed.